publishers were very uncomfortable with the idea that anyone could get online and review a book and have that review count just as much as a review in the New York Times Book Review, for example. Google scanned books in libraries, and authors and publishers were very upset about this. Sony and Apple are hardware companies. They exist to sell devices. Books are not their core strength. And yet, if we could have the next slide. We can't ignore these vendors. Whether you're selling ebooks or print books or both, the fact is that the brick and mortar stores are shrinking. And even with the remaining stores, there are fewer shelves that are devoted to books. Increasingly, when people shop for books, they shop online. And the only way to get found online is via your book listing. And this is never more true than for ebooks, because there is no physical product to discover. It's all digital. Can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So, what is metadata? It's the terms you use to describe your book. It's what online shoppers see when they check Amazon and Goodreads and Google and all the other places they can check online. And if we, let's go over some of the required metadata. These fields are the 5 basic fields that every vendor requires. They're essentially the lowest common denominator. So vendors will require an ISBN, they'll require a title, they'll require the contributor name, the author name, illustrator, any other contributor to the book, the price, obviously, they need to know that, and the format that the book comes in. Additionally, there are some sortable and searchable fields. These fields help your vendor decide when your book will be put up for sale on their site, the pub date, for example, where it will reside in their warehouse, if it's a physical book, so the dimensions are very helpful to vendors, to whom they will market the book, the language, and to some extent the page count, help them make that decision. And there's still more metadata that vendors like to have. Each one of these data points is critical in its own way for decent book sales. Territorial rights, for example, if the book can be sold in the US but not in the UK, that's important for the vendor to know. The age range of the audience, is it for children, is it for adults, is it part of a series, is it the first edition, second edition, revised edition, abridged edition? How many books are in the carton? The warehouse at the vendor wants to know that. And does this book replace another product? And there is still more. These are the marketing data items. Without these, your book actually might as well be invisible. A description is critical. What is the book about? What topics does it cover? A cover image, very important. Books without cover images have a hard time selling. BISAC categories, these are important because they map to each vendor's proprietary category sets. Keywords, reviews, and any other formats that the book is available in. Shoppers want to know this. This is an example of a book listing with only the required metadata, those 5 data points that I was talking about earlier. As you can see, it's not that inspiring. Looking at this page, it doesn't make me want to buy the book. There's no cover image, there's no description, there's just the title and the author. I know it's a paperback, but beyond that, I don't even know if it's fiction or nonfiction. How would I want to buy this book if I don't have a really good sense as to what it's about? If we look at the next slide, we see this is a lot more fun to look at. It includes the look inside content. It describes what the book is about. I'm not showing this right here, but when you scroll down on this page, you see links to other books with the same categories. This is a much more active page. It's a lot more fun and a lot more appealing to the potential buyer. These are a list of the core metadata elements that the Book Industry Study Group has put together for organizations that are sending out metadata to vendors and data aggregators. There are 31 data points. I've included a link to this at the end of the presentation, but as you can see, these are the data points that I covered in the previous slides. A while ago, Nielsen Book Data, which is the ISBN agency in the UK, did a study. They have what they call the BISG standard, which is the equivalent of what we saw on the previous slide, the BISG best practices. And they discovered that titles that meet this standard, that include all of those fields, see an average sales as 98% higher than those that don't meet the standard. And as you can see, the addition of an image is vital for online sales. 268% increase in sales in comparison to titles without an image. And split into offline and online sales, offline sales see an increase of 35% for titles that have enhanced metadata. Online sales, you can see, have a massive 178% increase. So as you can see, good metadata is much more powerful for online sales than offline. Independent publishers have to rely more and more on online sales for growth. So this is extremely important. So that's what you send. The other part of this is once the data leaves the house, what happens to it? And if we go to the next slide, the word begins to spread through the supply chain. The data gets ingested by whoever you send it to and whoever they send the data to. And as with any game of telephone, sometimes the message gets garbled over time. So if we go to the next slide, our Rube Goldberg machine. I think we need the previous one, actually. There we go. What's important to remember is that data from one source gets overwritten by another. Data sources get ranked. There are business rules around whose data has the right to overwrite other data. And it really does get Rube Goldbergian at times. At Barnes & Noble, where I worked for 3 years, for example, publishers had to earn the right to overwrite data from Ingram and Bowker. And this was because experience had taught us that publisher data could not generally be relied upon. It wasn't their core competency. Distributor and aggregator data tended to be more accurate than most publisher data. This was back when there were about 900,000 books in print. There are now some 28 million books in print. Vendors, as I mentioned, are drinking from the fire hose. However Rube Goldbergian it was back then, it's far more intricate now. There are many, many more data sources originating from many, many more organizations. And the algorithms at bookseller and search engine websites are phenomenally complicated. So that's incredibly important to remember. And we'll take a look at some hidden data sources. Tracing the places where your book data has gone wrong can be quite a wild goose chase. You've got all of these different, essentially vendors of data, where one can potentially overwrite another once they get to the final endpoint. Book-in-hand programs are usually done at warehouses where staff literally checks the data against the physical book. This can cause problems when the book is designed in a way that doesn't make it clear. For example, what's the title versus the subtitle? Who's the main author? How many pages it is? Truth be told, for years there's been a raging debate on the page count field. Do you include front matter? Do indexes count? Annotations? Endnotes? Most book-selling websites have a team of editors who have manual override privileges on data fields, which cannot be overwritten by a data feed. So each further correction must be done manually as well. So that's important to remember also. Any one of these fields on this delightful Amazon page could get overwritten due to a data feed with bad data in it. If we go to the next slide, the Book Industry Study Group has put together a study written by Brian O'Leary, who's a consultant in the industry, about metadata that has wonderful explanations of the potential pitfalls of all this book information zinging around the supply chain. Brian traces metadata feeds from publisher to aggregator to vendor very effectively, and there are some surprising finds. The report itself costs $50, but there's an overview that's available for free on the BISG website, and I've got a link to that at the end of my presentation as well. Finally, there are no easy prescriptions. The best thing you can do is monitor your metadata. It really is that simple. You won't know something's wrong unless A, you see it yourself, or B, someone tells you. But do you really want anybody telling you? It's best to find it out yourself. It seems like a clumsy idea, and it is, but because there are so many places that metadata can go wrong, it's also essential. You have no control over how someone else is going to use your book information. It's not copyrightable, and vendors will, of course, list books however they feel their consumers want to see them listed. But you can prevent egregious errors by keeping an eye out on your book listings and contacting the vendor when things go wrong. Remember the hidden data sources. If you work with a distributor and you see a bad listing for your book on Amazon, contact the distributor to find out what they've got for your book record. And most importantly, if you go to myidentifiers.com, you can edit your book metadata within the Bowker data feed yourself. These are some useful resources: the BISG Best Practices document, the Nielsen Study, which is available for free, the BISG white paper on metadata that I mentioned, and then there's a book that was just recently published called the Metadata Handbook. So that's a good resource as well. And now I'll turn it over to Devorah. Devorah, I'll go ahead and introduce you. Okay. Devorah Bloom-Ashlam has been with DCL since 2001, where she's a senior product manager specializing in ebook conversions. Prior to DCL, Devorah worked with an earlier generation of ebooks as an ebook coding expert in the Barnes & Noble Digital Content Division. Devorah, take it away.
Thanks, Laura. So I just want to start with a very quick introduction to ebooks from a technical perspective. Laura gave us a great overview about, publishing your book, self-publishing your book digitally, and how important metadata is. But what happens when you actually want to convert your book to an ebook? So EPUB is the accepted standard in the industry. It was created by the IDPS, and it's used for most e-readers, for the iPad, the Sony Reader, the Barnes & Noble Nook. Mobi is also a very large player. It's proprietary to Amazon and used on all the Amazon devices. EPUB is an evolving standard, meaning that we're currently at version 3, EPUB version 3, in which they added lots of new formatting that to make your ebook. But it's constantly changing. So as time goes on, and as the industry needs more things, and the publishers and authors come to expect more things, then the EPUB standard is changing. It's also supported differently by the different e-readers. So you may have an EPUB file that can include a video, for example, and that's okay according to the EPUB standard. But the different e-readers may or may not support it. So that's also something that you definitely have to keep in mind. eBooks are publications and need care in their production. In the industry, in the publishing industry, we're very used to the fact that a paper book needs lots of special handling before it can go out to print, whether it's editing or copy editing or proofreading. And for some reason in the industry, it's been kind of like accepted that once you have a paper book, then you kind of expect that your ebook will be just like that without too much care. But that's really not the case. An ebook is just as much a publication as a print book is, and it needs special care in its production. And there are no silver bullets. There's no easy way to just press a button and everything will just be perfect in your ebook file, especially if it has, lots of formatting or differences in your ebook. So we're going to talk about all those things. So the first thing that one needs to think about when they're deciding to convert their book to an ebook is, do you want a fixed layout or a reflowable conversion? And what is that? Fixed layout is basically an exact match to your paper source. So any page breaks or any formatting that you have in your paper book that you want it to look exactly like that in your ebook, you would need to get a fixed layout conversion. And this is mostly used for children's books where the layout of the images and the text is so important. It's very visual, and it's mostly used for children's books. And the things to remember about fixed layout, though, is that it's a proprietary format for each device. So even though we mentioned that EPUB is a standard, it's really only a standard for reflowable. There has not yet been a standard set up for fixed layout conversion. So it's going to be a different format for each device. So a fixed layout for the iPad is not necessarily the same fixed layout for the Nook. And obviously also it's not the same for the Kindle. And because of that, not only is the conversion more expensive for a fixed layout, because you need a different file for every device, it ends up being a more expensive proposition. However, if you're very married to the look of the source, and that's really very important to the look of and feel of your book, then this is, the kind of conversion that you would want to go along with. On the other side is the reflowable conversion, where we have most ebooks are really reflowable. It's a more linear format. There's no concept of a page. Whatever you see you'll see what's on the screen based on the size of the screen and based on the font size that the user is choosing. So what do we have to keep in mind when we're converting from a paper or a PDF source and we're going to an ebook? Like I mentioned before, there's no concept of a page. So what you see on your screen is not going to be the same thing that somebody else sees on their screen. There's no concept of page numbers, no concept of a header or footer, and basically the line break is going to be different on any device because the screen size is different. So if you have a book that is more than one column, that's also something that you want to keep in mind because the real estate on the screen is that much less. And so you may need to change your content so that it's in a more linear format of just one column. Something else to keep in mind is, do you need an index? In a paper book, an index is really very important. However, when you're dealing with an ebook, that may or may not be necessary because there's a search function on most devices, if not all devices. And if it is necessary, if a search, there's too many terms in a book and you really want to figure out what specific location to go to, then how do you put that linking in? If there's no concept of a page, how do you actually reference those items? And lastly, if you look at the picture on the screen, you have this table in the middle of a paragraph, technically, but it doesn't disturb the reading of the page. However, if you were to convert this book exactly the way it looks on the screen to an ebook, then you would end up with a table in the middle of a paragraph, and that's obviously not something that you would want to see. So a decision has to be made. Do you want to move it to the end of the paragraph? Do you want to move it directly after it's referenced? But again, these are things that you have to keep in mind when you're going from a paper format or a page layout format to an ebook reflowable format. So I mentioned a few times how there are no silver bullets and you can't just press a button and have your book ready and available as an ebook. However, there are so many software packages out there that claim to do just that. So for the purpose of this presentation, I took a book and I actually ran it through 3 automated conversions, and let's see what happens. So this is actually just a screenshot of what the source document looked like. So as you can see, it's a novel-like material. It's very simple, just a bunch of paragraphs that has some emphasis, a little bit of formatting. And so what happened? So if you look at the next slide, we have, this was, we ran it through this PDF file. We ran through this software package, which was a free software package that's publicly available. And what happened? The chapter header was found in the middle of a paragraph. We had multiple links to the same chapter heading because basically the software expected, it saw every page header and it thought that it was a new chapter. There was italics emphasis that wasn't retained. The paragraph breaks didn't match the source, and there was just lots of extra text, random text that was put into the document. The next software package, which was a paid software package, we ran the same file through, and our ebook ended up with a whole bunch of missing random characters. Again, emphasis was not retained. There was a footnote linking character, and it was captured as plain text. And there was some indented formatting, and that was not retained either. And in the third software package, we saw that there were some extra spaces put in around punctuation. There was missing spaces between words. The PDF header was captured as plain text repeatedly. There were some merged paragraphs and some unnecessary hyphens. So basically, with each of these software packages that do an automated conversion, we saw that not one of them was perfect, and they each had their own set of challenges of taking this PDF and converting it to an ebook format. So what is our approach for ebook conversion? So here we have our flow chart of what happens to every book that comes in and how we handle it. So when we initially get the materials, we obviously look through it and see, is there anything in here that we've never seen before, anything different that's going to need special attention. If it's coming from paper, then we have to go through the scanning process of actually getting it into a digital format. We zone and we extract the text. We basically identify everything on the page. Is this a header, a footer? Is this part of the actual book? Is this a page number? Is this an image or a table? We extract the text out of the file. We crop any images, if there are any images in the file, to the proper standard for the ebook. We go through a stage where what we call proofreading and cleanup. So depending on what the source was, if it was paper and it went through an OCR scanning process, and we actually need to proofread the book and make sure that no zeros come up as O's or no ones come up as L's. Or if it came in from a PDF normal or another electronic software package that there was actually text behind, we need to go through the cleanup process, which would clean up any of the items that we saw in the previous examples of anything like that, something like hyphens or special characters, things that don't actually translate well when extracting the text. Once we have that all in a Word document, we go through and we style it, and we use some pre-tagging that identifies certain things that will feed into our conversion software. Only then do we convert that to HTML. We edit the CSS based on the look of the source, because we obviously want to replicate the look of the source as much as possible in design and format. We create the actual EPUB and all the relevant files to make sure that we package it correctly as an EPUB. We validate it. We make sure that it's valid according to the EPUB standard. We view the EPUB file. We then take that EPUB file and make some adjustments so that we could use that as a base and convert to MOBI. We then view the MOBI file. It goes through some final quality control, and only then does it get delivered to the client. Next slide. Okay, and here's just a screenshot for your reference of what our intermediary Word document would look like after the cleanup and the pre-tagging. So it basically, in this document, we have all the text exactly the way we want to see it. We have some pre-tagging that will be registered by our software to make sure that the output comes out properly. And this is what our final EPUB output would look like. And as you can see, it looks very similar to the initial PDF source document that we looked at. And that's really what our goal is here in trying to get this book formatted as best as possible. Here I have just some reference to some of the tools that we use for EPUB validation. EPUB check is publicly available, and it validates against the EPUB standard. And EPUB pre-flight checks for device-specific issues, like some of the devices won't accept the file if it's over a certain size, and other things like that. So basically every file has to be validated according to these tools. And once you have your EPUB or your MOBI file, then what do you do with it? So basically, some of the major eBook distributors, like we have listed here on the screen, allows you to self-publish and upload it on your own. So if you have a MOBI file and you want to publish it with Amazon, they have a wonderful platform called KDP, Kindle Direct Publishing, where all you do is set up an account, enter some information about your book, all that metadata that Laura had mentioned earlier, and then you just upload the MOBI file, and within 24 to 48 hours, your book will be up for sale and available on Amazon. To publish your book with Apple, you need to be registered with iTunes Connect. And again, once you have your EPUB file and you're registered with them, all you do is fill out some information about your book, upload the file, and within a couple days it will be up and ready for sale. And Barnes & Noble they had a self-publishing platform called Pubit that was recently transitioned to Nook Press. And again, same story there. You just enter some information, basic metadata information about your book. You upload the EPUB file, the valid EPUB file, and within a few days it will be up and ready for sale on Barnes & Noble. And with that, I just want to go over a couple things that we learned. And Laura, if you want to take that.
Sure, yeah. Well, we know that metadata is critical for discovery. The Nielsen survey pretty much proved that. We did talk about how tracking down errors in the supply chain is really painstaking and can sometimes be a wild goose chase, but it still has to be done. Devorah, do you want to go over the ebook bullet?
Oh, sure. So as we mentioned, ebook conversions do take special care, just like a print publication would take, especially if your book has lots of formatting. I mean, we went over some examples of a very basic book that didn't have too much formatting, but especially if your book has questions and answers, if it has figures and tables, or anything, poetry or a cookbook or anything like that would obviously need additional care. And some redesigning of your book content may be necessary. If your book was very print, was published specifically for print, there may need to be some changes that you need to do before converting as an ebook.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura and Devora. Again, that was Laura Dawson, who's the Product Manager of Identifiers at Bowker, and Devora Ashlem, our Senior Project Manager of eBooks at DCL. I also want to highly recommend everybody check out selfpublishedauthor.com from Bowker. We are going to move into questions and answers. We've gotten a lot of great questions from you guys. Thank you so much. I do want to start, before I hand things back to Laura and Devora, with a question that I can probably answer the best, which is, where can I see this webinar? Yes, this webinar has been recorded, and it will be made available both on GoToWebinar, who is the initial webinar host of it, as well as DCL.com, as well as possibly through Bowker. So look for wherever you found out about this webinar for more information, and we will have that to you probably within the next 24 hours or so. All right, we're going to get started with some questions. Laura, I think this one is for you. Let's start with a more general question. Okay. Can you speak a little bit about how ebook metadata is different from print book metadata?
It's different because the vendors are different, so they are asking for different data points. With ebook data, you may be asked to include the size of the file. That's something that some ebook vendors like to see. You may be asked for page count for a book that is only published digitally, and in some cases there are publishers that just make that number up. So you just have to approximate what you think it would be in pages if it were a print book. Then there are certain types of file formats as opposed to print book formats. You're describing a digital product as opposed to a physical one. So the data points will accordingly be different.
Okay, thank you. This one might be for you, Devora. If I don't have an e-reader, how can I look at my file?
Okay, good question. Basically, there are a couple of desktop publisher desktop programs to read an EPUB and a MOBI file. Many of the devices, like the Kindle, there's something called a Kindle Previewer that you can download, and that's for your PC or for your Mac computer. But basically, for your desktop, you can actually look at it using the Kindle Previewer to look at your MOBI file. Or for the EPUB file, Adobe has a wonderful program called Adobe Digital Edition, and you can review your EPUB file that way. And that uses the same SDK as the Sony Reader. So the way that it renders in Adobe Digital Edition, you can be pretty confident that it's going to look pretty much the same way on your Sony Reader or your Nook as well.
Great. Laura, I think when we were talking about BISAC, we had a few questions come in back to back, so I'm going to combine them a little bit. So sure. The first question is, what is BISAC and what are the categories? And to add to that is the subject the same as the categories on distributors? Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah. No, I know what that's referring to.
Okay.
The BISAC categories, BISAC stands for Book Industry Standards and Communication, and these are categories that have been developed by publishers and booksellers at a series of meetings that the BISG hosts. So they're primarily for bookstores, these categories, and they're an industry standard. They delineate what the books are about, and in a physical bookstore, where should they be shelved? In an online bookstore, where will those book listings appear? So having the appropriate BISAC category means that your history book is not going to be shelved or displayed with the cookbooks. As to the distributor categories, as I mentioned, these are an industry standard, the BISAC codes. They map to proprietary codes. So your distributor probably has its own set of codes, and they accept the BISAC codes and then sort of translate them into their proprietary codes. If you're uploading directly to a distributor and their codes are the ones that you have to select from, then by all means, select from those. It's just, you know, a way for you to make sure that your book appears in the context of other books that are like it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Laura. We've had a couple of questions, Devorah. These are for you, about proprietary standards and industry standards. So I'm going to try to combine these a little bit. One is, I heard that Amazon accepts EPUB files, but you mentioned that Mobi is the Amazon format. Can you clarify? And then another question from a different questioner, I thought the Apple EPUB file was proprietary and not an industry standard. So if you can speak a little bit about proprietary versus industry standard.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, EPUB is a standard written by the IDPF, and it is accepted across most of the industries. The Kindle does not read an EPUB file. However, Amazon will accept your EPUB file and do an automatic conversion to Mobi. Now, most of the time, I don't want to say most of the time, many times, your EPUB file will automatically convert to Kindle and it will look just as you expect. However, many times it won't. Because it really is a different format, if the Mobi format does not support something that the EPUB format does, or it handles something a different way, then it will just kind of do whatever it wants with it. So what we recommend to our customers is really to have a separate EPUB file for the platforms that accept EPUB, and then a separate Mobi file that is used specifically for Kindle. We do use the EPUB file as a base, but before we go in to create that Mobi file, we do go in and make specific changes specifically for the Kindle, because, you know, as I mentioned before, the different devices will render files differently. So your EPUB file may look slightly different if you're looking at it on the iPad and on the Nook. However, on the Kindle, because your Mobi file is only going onto a Kindle device, you can actually specify and use only the styles that will work on the Kindle. And just to talk to the Apple, EPUB is a standard. It's not proprietary to Apple, and the iPad will read it. What is proprietary to Apple, and that might be what you're referring to, is actually the iBook format. And Apple put out a platform to create fixed layout or interactive kind of textbooks. And that is proprietary to Apple, and if you create a file in iBooks, it will only be able to be sold by Apple. So the iBooks format is proprietary, but the EPUB format, the standard reflowable EPUB format, is not proprietary.
Thank you. Laura, here's one for you on metadata. The attendee asked or said, I attended another webcast last night, still about metadata. The two presenters agreed that for the purposes of having a truly comprehensive metadata, there's really no such thing as too much data. What's your take on that?
I think it's great to supply as much information as you possibly can about your book. The vendors, once you send your metadata to them, are not necessarily going to accept it all, and different vendors are going to accept different data points. We found out recently that Amazon has stopped accepting keywords from self-published authors. I suspect it's because some authors are spamming Amazon, including keywords that are not appropriate for their books. But on the other hand, there are other vendors that do accept them, like Kobo. So you just want to describe your book as fully as you possibly can, and it really is up to the vendor what they're going to accept and what they're not. But at least you've done everything you could.
Okay, thank you. This one I think is for you, Devorah. How long does it take to convert an ebook?
We generally say that it takes between 2 to 3 weeks for an ebook conversion. The actual conversion and going through the process that I had mentioned before could take as little as 2 days. But we generally say it's about 2 weeks, and if a rush is needed for whatever reason, then we could handle that as well. But in normal circumstances, 2 to 3 weeks is normal turnaround time.
Thank you. Laura, I think this is for you, and it's just a quick one. For clarification, are metadata errors in the supply chain only for print books?
No.
Okay.
No, we find that eBook metadata also has its share of errors.
Okay. Devora, I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up, so we still have questions coming in. Devora, do you recommend converting your book to multiple formats, i.e. both MOBI and EPUB?
Yes, definitely. You know, as I mentioned before, the different devices render the files differently. So if you're converting to EPUB and you know that you're going to be submitting that file to both Apple and Barnes & Noble, we're going to make sure that the styling will work for both Apple and Barnes & Noble. And we may need to make a decision about something and kind of tag it to the lowest common denominator. But in order for it to be readable on both of them, that's what we're going to do. Well, if we're converting separately to MOBI, we know that it's only going to be read on the Kindle devices. So we can tag it as best as possible using as much styling as is allowed by the Kindle. Just to talk to the, you know, EPUB, most customers of ours, you know, definitely convert to EPUB, to one EPUB file for any device that reads EPUB. However, sometimes we'll have some customers who have a really interactive kind of book that on the iPad it can do so much more than on, you know, say the Nook or the Kobo. So what they actually do is they actually convert to 3 formats. They'll convert to MOBI for the Kindle. They'll convert to 2 EPUB files, one of like a more dumbed-down EPUB, and then specifically for Apple, for the iOS platforms, and we'll be able to add a lot more things into there that we wouldn't be able to do because it's allowed by the standard, but not necessarily picked up and rendered properly by the devices. So, you know, knowing what you're going to be doing with your book and how you're going to distribute it is really key to deciding to what format you want to distribute it to.
Great.
And convert to.
Great, thank you. Laura, we have a few questions about ISBNs, so I'm going to try to wrap them up together.
Sure.
How do you obtain an ISBN, and do separate ISBNs have to be issued for different formats, such as MOBI versus EPUB?
Okay, obtaining an ISBN is very simple. You go to www.myidentifiers.com, and that website walks you through the whole process. It's very, very simple. You can buy in batches, and the price goes down the more you buy. Do separate ISBNs have to be issued for different formats? The ISBN standard, and it is an international ISO standard, does specify that different formats of any book product get different ISBNs, unique ISBNs, so that the end user can differentiate between the two. So, for example, your hardcover would have a different ISBN than your paperback. So your MOBI, your PDF, your EPUB would all have different ISBNs, just so that the end user doesn't get confused.
Great, thank you. Devora, what are the most common ebook reading devices?
So from what we've seen and from the interest of from publishers and authors that come to us, we basically see I would say most are converting to MOBI for Kindle. I think also publishing through Amazon is also extremely simple and easy for self-published authors. So I would say that the Kindle is definitely up there on one of the top of the list, and the iPad and the Nook as well definitely come in very high.
Great. Let's see. Laura, I think we have one more for you.
Okay.
Can't ebook vendors just take the metadata directly from the ebook file itself? Why do I need to send it separately?
I love that question. Because they should be able to. but they don't do it accurately. They don't do a very good job of it, and not everybody is populating their ebook files with the appropriate metadata. Not everybody is including it. So they really haven't, most vendors really haven't worked very hard at extracting the metadata from the book itself. So that's why sending a separate metadata file ensures that accurate data has a better shot at getting on that vendor's website, because they haven't developed the parsers necessary to take that data out of the file.
Great. Okay, Devora, I think we have one last one for you. Can you explain what an enhanced ebook is and what e-reader might work best?
Sure. What we've come to call an enhanced ebook is basically an ebook that includes audio or video. Now, those are adding audio and video to your ebook is allowed according to the standard. However, many of the devices don't yet support that. The iPad does support that. I would say that they're the best supporters of EPUB 3 and everything that includes. So definitely the iOS devices. For example, the Kindle does not support it. However, if you're reading your Kindle on an iOS device, it will support audio and video. So if you're converting to Kindle and you know that some of your users out there and some of the buyers out there are going to download their Kindle onto their iPad, you may want to include that audio and video so that they can look at it that way. But just keep in mind that none of the other Kindle devices will support that. Yeah, definitely the iPad, the Apple devices have the lead on that for sure. Okay. I think we're going to wrap up our webinar today. Thank you everybody for joining us. I wanted to say thanks again. Many, many thanks to Laura Dawson, the Product Manager of Identifiers at Bowker, and our own Devora Ashlem, Senior Project Manager of eBooks at DCL. Just a reminder, you will indeed be able to see the webinar again. It has been recorded. It will be made available at dclab.com and through Bowker. Keep your eye out for more information there. We had a lot of great questions today. If you have any other questions, the contact information for both of our wonderful speakers is right here on this slide. We hope you will take the time to get in touch and find out more. Good luck to all you self-published authors out there, and thank you so much for joining us today. This is Jennifer Abel signing off.